Hello and welcome to Feeding Under Fire. My name's Simon Walker. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Strathclyde, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a trench pudding, in particular a hardtack lemon pudding. But before we get started, I just want to say a massive thank you to the Recipe Project, as this video is going to be part of their digital conversation, What is a Recipe, which is a fantastic program. You should check it all out, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion on Twitter that goes with this video as well. So great stuff, thanks very much. So for today, we're going to be making, as I said, a hardtack lemon pudding, or as soldiers called it, Duff. Now, the definitive guide on soldiers' slangs and songs and different phrases and stuff is brothy and partridge, and they say that Duff is the name for pudding, and it's apparently Duff is a pudding made of boiled sweet pudding, and that's what we would all call it. So you wouldn't really say, oh, we're having pudding, you say, well, what's for Duff? So let's find out how to make it. What we need is all of these lovely ingredients. Now, I've actually changed the recipe because what I had was for 100 men, and since I have no intention of feeding this to 100 people, I've reduced it down to 4. So some of the measurements are more guesstimates, but if you're trying it yourself, then you should be okay with the measures that I've come up with. So for what you're going to need is, first of all, 150 grams of sugar. So sugar's already in the bowl. Between 150 grams, 200 grams. You're going to need the juice of 2 to 3 lemons. You're going to need some flour, just some plain flour, and you're going to need 240 grams of hardtack biscuit, which we'll come back to in a second, and you're going to need 20 grams of dripping. Now, the dripping that they would use was actually runoff from the meats that they would cook. So usually bacon, and they would collect the fat, and then they would reuse it. So that's exactly what I've done. Cooked some bacon, kept the dripping, and that's what we're going to use, which would be lovely. Now, for the hardtack, what you need to do is actually mince it. I got a mincer, love my new mincer, and I'm going to put a picture of me, or a video of me mincing, hopefully here. It was actually quite difficult to do. I have to soak the hardtack I soaked it for around 7 to 8 hours, and that gave me a kind of a paste eventually, but even still, some of the hardtack still wasn't able to be minced, and I had to kind of throw it away. So you want to soak it, if you're doing this to yourself and you've got your hardtack recipe, which is in episode 1, you can soak it for at least 7 to 8 hours, maybe a bit longer, and then put it to the mincer. This lovely kind of gloopy paste that we're going to use for the pudding. Okay. Why was pudding important? Well, let's be honest. Over the course of a soldier's day, pudding meant that they were getting something sweet to eat. Now, soldiers would tend to have around 4 meals a day, as you can see from this menu. And up to 4 times a day, while they were getting different food, at some point they would get a type of pudding. It's not always served at the same time. As you can see, sometimes it came with the lunch meal, and sometimes it came to the dinner meal, and there were various different types, ranging from bread and butter pudding, blood pudding, all the way up to just bread and jam. And if you're interested in jam, then you should watch the episode 3, that'll tell you how to make jam. And Duff turns up absolutely everywhere, on the front line, behind the lines, and for example, in April 1915, stretcher bearer Private C. Bradley talked about getting his pudding in a letter home to Westgate End Young People's Society. It was a letter that was actually printed, and Bradley was a stretcher bearer, and he was under constant pressure, and he was exhausted, and that day he only got 1 meal, but he still got some Duff. And he said, at the end of an 8th day, we only had 1 meal, which consisted of rice pudding made of water, rice and sugar, and bully beef and biscuits boiled in a kind of broth. Now, it wasn't the most delicious of meals, but it was some kind of dessert. It was some kind of sweet thing to go with their diet. And even during retreat, men seemed to get a bit of pudding. Whilst taking refuge, as his platoon took refuge in 1915 in an abandoned old house, Private G. Thornley of the South Staffordshire Regiment on the Western Front wrote with gusto in his diary about his daily pudding. The food we get in the finest. We have pudding every day, and we're able to have beef and kidney pie occasionally. While I was away, I have been massively stirring this as much as possible, trying to get some consistency. So this is where we're at the moment, and got to be honest, there's a lot of extra flour in here. So if you are, when you're making this yourself, maybe add as much flour and maybe a little bit more sugar to try and get a kind of paste consistency. Otherwise, it's just going to all kind of drain out. And what it's going to drain out of is something I've never used before, which my camera operator assures me is called a mousseline, which I can't say. So I'm going to call it a muslin, but if you actually do know what it's called and how to use it, feel free to tell me that I'm terrible in the comments. So this, in accordance to the original recipe, it just says cloth. It says steaming cloth, and that's exactly what I'm trying to use here. I've soaked it beforehand to kind of give it a little bit of kind of moisture, and following some advice from YouTube, I was told to put some flour on the inside, so I'm just going to quickly dust it with flour, and apparently this helps stop it from sticking and is basically very helpful for the steaming process. And then we take our pudding and we pour it out. I don't know about you, but it's making me hungry. So we put it in there, like this, and get this lovely dollop of pudding. There we go. And so all the videos that I saw said that the folding process is the most important part. So you have to take basically an inch from each side and pull it together like this. There you go. So there is your pudding. Fantastic. And what we're going to do now is you're going to put it into your pan. It has to be boiling. So you have to have your boiling water, and you want your whole pan submersed, and you're going to take your pudding and you're going to put it on top of the plate to make sure it doesn't burn. Put your lid on it, and that is where we're going to leave it for the next 2.5 hours. Now, before I get to try the delicious pudding, or at least subject somebody else to trying the delicious pudding, I think it's important very quickly to just have a little bit of a look at nutrition. In 1910, British Army Military Manual of Cooking does not discuss calories per recipe, but it does state that British soldiers were supposed to have 4,500 calories per day. Archival sources or printed sources highlight what the calories were per meal, per portion, and so forth. But working it out based on the rare ingredients that I've included, I reckon it's somewhere between 400 to 5, maybe even 600 calories, depending on what they had at the time. So you can see how something like pudding or Duff would be an important addition to making sure that men on the front line or behind the lines were making sure that they were getting their calorie intake. Right, now, so we have the pudding and it looks delicious. I've got a little bit of something to admit. Now, when I originally took the pudding out from the pudding cloth, it was a splodge. So then put it into a bowl, and that's given it this lovely kind of pudding shape. So if you do decide to do it at home, although many people have assured me that no one is trying to cook this at home, I'd probably put it into a bowl and bring the water to just up to the bowl level and steam it again for about 2.5 hours to 3 hours. So good luck with that. But on we go. So for the taste test, I'm very lucky to have a colleague and friend from the University of Strathclyde. This is Rowena Hutton. She's a PhD candidate in early modern history who specialises in Scottish parliamentary history. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, Rowena has volunteered to try the pudding. Yeah, you look excited. But what do you think of it, by the way?
It looks very interesting.
I think interesting is a good shout. I think we'll give it a shot. So, to tell you what you're eating, you hope you don't mind fingers because you're not really getting a choice. You're eating lemon hard tack sponge, and let's just kind of leave it at that. So we give it a try and see what you think. Well,
it tastes like it hasn't been cooked enough.
yeah, it tastes exactly. It's very.
It looks like it hasn't been cooked enough.
It's very springy and it's very spongy, and I like the fact that it bounces around the plate. But
did they use this as a weapon?
I hope not. But so I mean, what do you think it tasted like?
It actually doesn't taste very bad.
It doesn't really taste of anything.
And you can taste the lemon, but it doesn't. Its consistency is very off-putting.
Yeah, it's gelatinous, I think, for the way I'd put it, yeah. And there's a lot, I think you can taste the sugar and you can taste the lemon.
Yeah, were there other variations of it?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing. You're brave enough to eat more of it, well done you. That's the interesting thing, and as I was saying beforehand, that there were various different varieties of pudding that were available, and you've got like plum pudding, bread and butter pudding, but they're all made from the same ingredients. And this, as I said, that this was taken from several different ingredients, but several different versions. But biscuit pudding is almost exactly the same, except in the British Army cookbook for 1914, it was made with lime, not lemon. So this would be a recipe they just have over and over and over again.
So how many people would have eaten this?
That's actually a fantastic question. So this recipe was designed for 4 people. So in theory, you probably should be quartering it. I mean, help yourself to more if you want it. But this is worked down for about 100 people. And I guesstimate that between 4 people, you're probably getting between 400 and 600 calories for this.
Certainly because it's so stodgy. You can see that it would certainly stick to the bones, as it were. Yeah. So I can imagine that it would be quite a good thing to have to eat.
Kind of like porridge or gruel, and it was very easy to create, to mix and to cook, so you can see how it would be quite easy to kind of ferry from behind the line to the front line. You get it in the field kitchen, you can make it en masse and serve it. So can I interest you in any more?
I'm going to pass.
Okay, fine.
That's okay.
Well, I mean, it's important because obviously it gave sugar, it gave a bit of a treat to the soldiers, but you've got to be honest, you were lucky with this particular recipe, because whilst I was going through the archives, there was a horror story from a soldier called Alec Baldrill, who said that he had a friend, and his friend was wanted his pudding, constantly demanded more pudding, more Duff every day, and the cook finally had enough and said, I'll tell you what, if you go out and you fill the firewood for tomorrow, I'll make you your own pudding. And the guy was like, oh, brilliant, yeah, absolutely fantastic. So he went and he came back with like masses of firewood, filled the place with firewood, and even the chef was like, no problem. So the next day, had their dinner in the field kitchen, and afterwards starts banging his spoon on the table. He's like, where's my pudding? And the chef's like, no problem, comes out, and he gives him this massive kind of plate, apparently this massive plate of pudding, and the guy yummed it up and ate it all up. And the chef's kind of looking, smiling and laughing, and afterwards he's like, did you like that? He's like, yeah. And he's like, do you know what it was? He's like, no. And he's like, oh, it was made from dubbin. So if you don't know, dubbin is leather polish. It's actually wax. So essentially they'd just taken a pudding, mixed it full of wax and fed it to him. And apparently the guy said he'd eat it again.
Okay. Yeah. So would you have had this with a sauce or just as it is?
I would personally serve it with a sauce. I mean, actually, I wouldn't personally serve it at all. But no, you'd be lucky to get it as is.
Okay, maybe with a bit of custard.
Lemon and custard, maybe. Okay. Add your thoughts in the comments. Brilliant. Thank you very much for being our trial person this week. So guys, that's it for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you once again to the Recipe Project. I look forward to all the discussion on Twitter, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.